Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ronnie Dennis. I'm Vice President for External Affairs at the Cooper Union, and I'm delighted to welcome you here today to hear the state of the MTA Address delivered by Lee Sander, Executive Director and CEO of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. First, I've been asked to point out fire exits, and I'd like to let you know that there are 4 doors at the rear of the Great Hall behind you, as well as doors at the front and either side of the hall. For those of you who've never been here before, you are sitting in the historic Great Hall of the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art. In 1859, Peter Cooper founded the Cooper Union so that people who had been closed out of higher education, poor people, immigrants, women, African Americans, could get an education of the first rank, in his words, as free as air and water. But he wanted to go beyond his students. He wanted to reach into the city, and so he built this hall, which could at that time hold 3,000 people standing, to engage people in all walks of life in discussing the critical issues of the day. In 1860, at this podium, Abraham Lincoln delivered his Right Makes Might speech, which is widely credited with winning him the Republican nomination for the presidency. Many transformational movements had their beginnings in the Great Hall. Victoria Woodhull had her offices here and led the women's suffrage movement from this platform. The NAACP and the American Red Cross were founded here. Samuel Gompers rallied the workers for laborers' rights. And as for tenants' rights, well, the New York City Rent Guidelines Board continues to hold its somewhat raucous meetings here on a regular basis. In recent months, Mike Bloomberg, Tom Brokaw, Mariette Cuomo, Tim Russert, Newt Gingrich, and John Edwards have all taken this stage to talk about the upcoming presidential election. So, on the 40th anniversary of the MTA, we are proud to host several events in celebration of the largest public transportation network in North America, the most highly used public transit system in the nation, and with Cooper Union's own LEED Gold building going up right outside, I'm proud to say the public transport system that keeps New York City the most energy efficient city in the United States. To officially open the proceedings, I'd like to invite you to turn your attention to the video screens for a welcome and introduction from MTA Chairman Dale Hammerden. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Dale Hammerdinger, Chairman of the Board of the MTA. Today and throughout this month, we are commemorating the 40th anniversary of the creation of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. In a moment, you'll hear MTA Executive Director Good morning. I'm Dale Hammerdinger, Chairman of the Board of the MTA. Today and In a moment, you'll hear MTA Executive Director and CEO deliver the first State of the MTA Address. We believe it's important to celebrate our achievements, but it's more important to communicate with you about the challenges ahead and our vision of the future. In the 4 months I've served as chairman, I've been out in the field to meet many of the 68,000 men and women who keep our network running. In every encounter, I've been impressed by the talent, knowledge, and and most of all, their dedication to keeping the New York region moving 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Before Lee speaks, I thought you'd like to see this brief film about the extraordinary work they do each and every day.
hopes, our dreams, our city almost came to a grinding halt. Almost. After all, New York is a region where 14 million people always need to get somewhere. So the MTA got the funding to launch the largest rebuilding effort in U.S. public transportation history. Through successive 5-year capital plans and investment of more than $70 billion, the MTA has overseen a top-to-bottom overhaul of equipment, facilities, and infrastructure. What does it all mean for New Yorkers? It means nearly 4,000 new high-tech subway cars, the largest equipment purchase in mass transit history. It means new technologies to help customers get where they want to go. It means the nation's largest fleet of clean fuel buses. It means railroads with award-winning on-time performance. It means hundreds of miles of renewed track and over 200 renovated stations, including Grand Central Terminal, the crown jewel of New York. Comfortable? You bet. Safe? Absolutely. Graffiti? Gone forever. This is a new day, and we're turning the page to the next chapter in New York's transportation history, with subway service to the east side of Manhattan. Direct service from Long Island into Grand Central Terminal. Extension of the 7 line to the west side of Manhattan. Faster, easier connection of 9 lines in the lower Manhattan financial district. And ultimately, a world-class, seamless regional transportation network. We're the MTA, and we're going your way.
Good morning. It is a great honor to speak to you today about the state of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority here in the Great Hall at Cooper Union. And I'd like to thank Cooper Union's president, George Campbell, Ronnie Dennis, you just heard from, and the Transit Museum Board for hosting today's address, as well as a series of other events that will illuminate the vital role the MTA plays in the life of the city and the region. Let me first recognize some of the people who have joined us here today. We have Councilman David Weprin. We have from our board, Susan Metzger, James Blair, Andrew Alpert, Jeff Kay, Vincent Tessitore. We have Michael Balboni, Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Commissioners Ned Sadi-Khan of DOT, and Chairman Matt Dowse of the TLC. We also have our MTA agency presidents and the MTA senior staff. We also have our many union leaders from the MTA family, and we are also joined by high school and college students studying transportation and engineering. I also want to thank Chairman Hemmerdinger, who couldn't be here today, but who Abraham Lincoln gave one of his landmark speeches in the fight against slavery. Like the Great Hall and this great university, the terminals and stations of the MTA are also democratic spaces for people from all walks of life. On the MTA's 40th anniversary, it is appropriate that we convene here today to reflect on our history, assess the challenges we face today, and articulate a vision for the future. 40 years ago, the MTA was born out of crisis. By 1968, decades of deferred maintenance and a lack of capital investment had begun to threaten the regional transportation network. It was a time when intellectuals debated the value of running rapid transit in a car-centric world. The viability of the big city was in question. Transit ridership was plummeting. Majestic Penn Station had just been demolished, and there was talk of taking a wrecking ball to Grand Central Terminal. Through the leadership of Governor Nelson Rockefeller and his allies, the MTA was created to perform two vital functions: coordinate the operations and planning of the region's diverse transportation systems and provide these transit services with fiscal stability. While dedicating Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority revenues provided a steady stream of revenue for operating transit, New York City's fiscal crisis in 1974 scuttled the MTA's ambitious plans for new subway and commuter rail lines. Underinvestment in the system continued. Track fires became routine. Trains derailed every 18 days on average, and 325 subway runs were abandoned every day. Subway crime was a fact of life in a system covered with graffiti. On a personal note, I was the general manager of the Manhattan Bus Division in the early 1980s when the second floor of the 100th Street Depot collapsed. In the dead of winter, we were forced to operate daily service for hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers from a pier on the Harlem River. Clearly, the MTA was in a downward spiral that could have compromised the future of the city and the region. Thankfully, the fortunes of the MTA changed. Under the leadership of Governor Carey, the state legislature, and MTA Chairman Richard Ravitch, the MTA secured funding from Washington, Albany, and City Hall to bring the system back to a state of good repair. And by insisting on the creation of 5-year capital plans, Dick Ravitch both saved the system from collapse and ensured its health through the current day. What has transpired since the Ravitch plan is nothing short of breathtaking. Since 1982, the MTA has invested $76 billion to rebuild 200 subway and rail stations and 700 miles of track. We've also rebuilt or purchased 6,400 subway cars and 10,000 buses. The results are extraordinary. Trains now last 40 times longer between breakdowns. The introduction of MetroCard and EasyPass has revolutionized people's travel habits, and ridership has soared by nearly 40%. And through the use of successful policing strategies, first by the former New York City Transit Police Department, and now by the NYPD and MTA Police, crime within the system has dropped to record lows. Obviously, we have come a long way, and we've learned a lot of valuable lessons. The challenges we face today are different from those we faced in 1968, but they are just as large and just as complex. Let me assure you, today's MTA is positioned to overcome these challenges and move on to become the best in class of large public transportation agencies in the world. New York is locked in a competition for brain power and capital with places like London, Shanghai, Hong settle for a second-rate transportation network. To remain a center of commerce, culture, and innovation, we must transform the MTA both internally and externally. We've already made significant progress on both of these fronts. Internally, our focus is on creating an environment and structure that brings out the best in all of the hardworking men and women of the MTA. From general managers to conductors, from bus drivers to subway station cleaners, from bridge and tunnel officers to police officers, the hundreds of MTA employees I've spoken with overwhelmingly like, if not love, their jobs. And keep in mind that many of them work under incredibly challenging conditions. Our responsibility is to provide a workplace environment that generates more of the esprit de corps I have encountered on many of my tours of the field. In the years ahead, we want to be known as the best public transportation agency to work for in the world. That's why the very first Blue Ribbon panel I commissioned focused on workforce development issues. We are now taking steps to implement the panel's recommendations. I am pleased to say that we have made the work of the panel available to all 68,000 of our employees, and it is available online at mta.info. We are also implementing the recommendations of our Track Safety Task Force, created in the aftermath of last year's tragic accidents. The scope of the review and level of collaboration between management and labor were unprecedented. Now, please join me for a moment of silence to recognize the three members of the MTA family who died performing their duties last year. Marvin Franklin, Daniel Boz, Dave Collins. Thank you. Improving management labor relations requires clear thinking and partnership. I want to acknowledge the leadership of our unions at the MTA and their commitment to reciprocity and problem solving. We are pleased that we've been able to resolve the contracts for our Metro North and Long Island Railroad employees. During that round of negotiations for Metro North, we were able to end a major conflict between two labor coalitions. That is gratifying as well. To fully realize the potential of the MTA workforce, we also need to address critical flaws in organizational structure and values. The organization of the MTA until now has changed little since 1968. It still has large pyramid-like structure and plenty of silos. We must emulate what the private sector has done over the last 2 decades. Break down boundaries to create value internally and externally. Now, each agency operates in its own universe instead of leveraging its resources within the larger organizational framework. We must be more in tune with our customers, optimize human resources, become more efficient, and be more operationally responsive in a post-9/11, post-Katrina environment. Simply put, the MTA must become leaner, flatter, and more integrated. That is why we will be consolidating back-office functions in the new MTA Business Service Center, an initiative that will save an estimated $40 million a year. That is why we created the MTA Emergency Response Center to coordinate the work of the agencies during emergencies. That is why we established our General Managers Program for the subway lines of New York City Transit, which will foster greater accountability and reduce levels of management between frontline employees and senior management. That is why I am pleased to announce that this year we will be taking significant steps to fully integrate the operations of New York City Transit's MTA bus and Long Island bus to create a consolidated regional bus operation. This will enable the MTA to eliminate redundant functions and better leverage the institutional capability of all three existing bus entities. That is why Metro North and the Long Island Railroad have established a collaborative and cooperative process on a wide range of issues affecting regional railroads, including procurement, technology, and customer service. The institutional changes I've described are already producing tangible, visible results for our customers. We are also working hard externally to transform who we are and the services we provide. We are upgrading the way we communicate with our customers. We will soon be communicating with you via real-time text messaging and email alerts in the event of a disruption in service. We're improving the signage and communications that help our customers navigate these disruptions and reach their destinations with the lowest possible level of inconvenience. We're transforming the way customers find schedule and fare information through Trip Planner and Trips 123. With an eye toward reducing congestion and idling engines, MTA Bridges and Tunnels will commission a study later this year on the feasibility of adopting video tolling technology as a replacement for cash toll technology similar to the use that on Route 407 in Toronto. We will soon begin a study that will lay out the foundation for the development of the next generation of fare media for the MTA subways, buses, and regional rail. In the years ahead, these modes of travel will be supported by one fare media, a smart, contactless device with enough functionality to ensure that someday it will work for all public transit from Maine to North Carolina. Improved customer service is about much more than one-way communications. It's also about our commitment to ongoing dialogue with customers, stakeholders, and the public at large. We held our first ever public engagement workshop in November and our first online webinar in December. Today we are committing to hold a public webinar each quarter. The first one will be held this month to discuss our newly released capital program for 2008 to 2013. We also introduced rider report cards for New York City Transit and MTA Bus, which allow riders to tell us their preferences and help us to prioritize scarce resources. But we know that what our customers want most is for us to provide more trains and more buses to more places you want to go when you want to go. Here on the occasion of the MTA's 40th anniversary, I have a lot of good news to share with you on that front. I have reviewed our 2008 revenues to date, which are in line with our budget projections. As a result, I will recommend to the board that we move ahead with the service enhancements included in the financial plan. That means $30 million in new service this year. Our customers will benefit from increased service on 11 subway lines, extended and new bus routes, additional commuter rail trains and cars on Long Island Railroad and Metro North, and improved customer communications. We have embraced the concept of breaking down institutional and political boundaries to improve service. In the past year, New York City Transit has initiated its first service across state lines, the S89 bus, which runs from Staten Island to the 34th Street Hudson Bergen Light Rail Station in Bayonne, New Jersey. Ridership gains on this line, from about 400 daily riders initially to nearly 800 daily riders today, have been so dramatic that New York City Transit plans to add 3 daily round trips next month. We have also applied this ethic of partnership including rail access to Stewart Airport, the development of Moynihan Station, and key security issues. Working with the Port Authority, New Jersey Transit, Connecticut DOT, and others, we will launch regional ticketing so that travelers can purchase all fares from the same place and use the same cars for multiple services of the transit agencies in the region. We're working with New Jersey Transit and Amtrak to create regional commuter rail interoperability. This will be revolutionary. It has been a long time coming. Interoperability will enable us to adopt our route network to reflect where people want to go. Through a study we initiated last year, the MTA is identifying routes for running Metro North service to New Jersey and Long Island. As our first pilot starting in the summer of 2009, we will run Metro North trains from the New Haven line to Giant Stadium on football weekends. The introduction of bus rapid transit in New York City will start another revolution. Later this year, New York City Transit and New York City DOT will launch our first BRT service. This is the kind of partnership we will need to make BRT a success, and I'm pleased Commissioner Jeanette Sadi-Khan could be here this morning. BRT will revolutionize surface transportation by delivering superior levels of service, primarily by deploying two exciting innovations: giving traffic signal priority to buses in dedicated lanes, and switching to walk-forward fare collection, which will reduce bus dwell times. In the area of security, we have partnered with NYPD, the New York State Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Transportation Security Administration, and state and local police to dramatically increase the number of patrols in our systems, and I thank our partnership with Deputy Secretary Balboni. These partnerships build on our own efforts to boost the safety and security of the network. When I arrived 14 months ago, the MTA Police Department patrolled an average of 50 commuter trains per week. Now, we patrol more than 1,000 a week. Today, we're joined by K-9 Law and his handler, Sergeant Paul Fresco. K-9 Law was named in the memory of Chief Thomas P. Lawless, who passed away while he was the Chief of Police at the MTA Police Department. Since 2007, we have added 6 K-9 teams, giving us one of the largest explosive detection K-9 units in the region. To date, we have committed $947 million to hardening the physical infrastructure of our network against post-9/11 threats. Future phases of this capital spending will bring our investment up to $1.5 billion. In addition to our agenda to transform the workplace, our institutional structure, values, and customer service, one of my highest priorities has been to develop a long-term vision and implement an action plan for the next 25 to 40 years. Both are absolutely critical if our region is going to meet the challenges of economic growth, livability, and sustainability in the first half of the 21st century. Let me first talk about context. We believe demographic trends like immigration and megatrends like climate change will shape New York City and the rest of the MTA's 5,000 square mile territory in the decades ahead. New York City forecasts 1 million new residents by 2030. The region is expected to add 3 million residents. Over that time period, our ridership is expected to grow by 20%. Next year, we will have 4 tunnel boring machines operating to expand the subway regional rail system. infrastructure spending from 3.5% to 8%. Meanwhile, the United States spends less than 1% of its GDP on infrastructure. That is unacceptable. We would need at least $702 billion to replace the assets of near-sea transit, the biggest piece of our nearly $1 trillion system. To protect your base of capital assets, experts say you should spend 2 to 4% of the total asset value on reinvestment annually. The level of reinvestment in near-sea transit assets comes to less than 0.5%. The $20.5 billion we're including in the capital program for investments in state of good repair and normal replacement is breathtaking. Nonetheless, it is well below the level of where we need to be in the long term. These realities about the MTA's capital stock bring our proposed $29.5 billion capital plan into focus. Governor Spitzer understands this global context and where the MTA needs to go in the 21st century. In his speech to the Association for Better New York last week, he underscored the importance of fully funding our capital program. We are fortunate to have his support. This 5-year capital plan, if approved and fully funded, will maintain the MTA's progress in attaining a state of good repair. With our investment of about $9.5 billion for system expansion and capacity improvements, we will ensure that the downstate region will have a transportation network that offers the levels and quality of service expected in a world center. Inherent in these capital investments and in congestion pricing, which I will talk about momentarily, is the belief that sustainability is critical to the region's future. Global warming and sea level rise are two of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, challenges that no one like society can afford to ignore. Because we move 8.5 million customers daily, we prevent millions of car trips every single day. Our very existence allows our region to have a much smaller carbon footprint and much higher levels of energy efficiency per capita than places without mass transit. Our transit services are leaders in the search for climate-friendly ways of operating. We're cutting carbon by expanding our fleet of hybrid electric buses. We're reducing other forms of pollution too. Since the early 1990s, Long Island Bus has had a major clean fuels program. To date, its 330 buses have prevented 37 tons of particulate matter from being spewed into the air. We must also be a catalyst for environmentally sound land use, smart growth, and transit-oriented development. Metro North's Beacon project is Exhibit A of the MTA's potential to shape the sustainable development and redevelopment across the MTA region. And I want to thank Stephen Gold, the Mayor of Beacon, for joining us this morning in that partnership. But overall, the best thing we can do as a region is build mass transit infrastructure and cluster mixed-use development around the MTA's existing stations. We will be moving expeditiously to reduce and manage the MTA's environmental impact in the years ahead through a series of recommendations and proposals you'll hear about next month when the MTA Sustainability Commission issues its interim report. We have included $50 million in the new capital program to fund these initiatives. Congestion pricing is a vital element in our fight against climate change and a critical piece of our strategy to fund the system capacity improvements and expansion included in our 2008 to 2013 capital programs. Net revenues of about $300 million a year will make it possible for the MTA to generate $4.5 billion from a 30-year bond issue. Congestion pricing will benefit transit riders, motorists, and the general public. If implemented, the federal government has promised more than $350 million in New York City, to New York City and the MTA. That federal aid will help us deliver enhanced bus and subway service across the 5 boroughs before congestion pricing is even up and running. Before I go any further, let me take this opportunity to applaud the vision and steadfastness of Mayor Bloomberg and Governor Spitzer's unyielding support on this vital policy initiative. In the Bronx, congestion pricing will fund more frequent service on the number 1 train and 3 new express bus routes. In Brooklyn, congestion pricing will create 3 new bus routes and increase the frequency of service on 4 routes. F trains will run more frequently, and the C train will be extended to a 10-car train from an 8-car train. In Queens, it will immediately increase service on the E and F lines before and after rush hour. Congestion pricing will also underwrite 6 new bus routes and increase the frequency of service on 13 routes. In Staten Island, congestion pricing will increase service on most of the express bus routes serving the borough. In Manhattan, congestion pricing will increase the frequency of 16 bus routes and improve service on the 1, C, E, and F trains. Congestion pricing will also enable us to implement several transformative improvements in the regional transportation network. New York City Transit will install communications-based train control on the number 7 and Queens Boulevard Hillside Avenue subway lines, which are the primary transit corridors in Queens. Transit is also studying how to lengthen subway trains and platforms to allow more riders on each train on overcrowded routes. The congestion pricing funding will also enable us to begin the next phase of 2nd Avenue, bring Metro North into Penn Station, and improve the Long Island Railroad Atlantic Avenue branch, improvements I'm going to talk about in more detail in a minute. In the short term, we must complete the first segment of 2nd Avenue subway, East Side access, the extension of the number 7 subway line, and the Fulton Street Transit Center. The day that the 2nd Avenue subway opens in 2015, it will redistribute more than 200,000 riders, relieving overcrowding on the Lexington Avenue line. East Side access will shave 40 minutes a day off the travel times of Long Island commuters bound for jobs in Midtown East. Over the course of the year, that's like accumulating 20 days of vacation. We must also build the Long Island Railroad Main Line Project, or third track, which will improve the reliability and capacity of the entire main line in combination with East Side access. The benefits of these ongoing mega projects are familiar to many of you. What is not well understood is the way in which East Side access and the 2nd Avenue subway will unlock the potential of the MTA network in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, in addition to Manhattan. Thanks to East Side access and funding from congestion pricing, Metro North will be able to boost service in the city, not only by going to Penn Station, but also by adding stations at Co-op City, Harchester, and Hunts Point. That will mean faster Manhattan-bound service and better service for those traveling north to Westchester for jobs. The 2nd Avenue subway can act as a truck line for new service to West Harlem, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. It can also make a major contribution to the revitalization of Lower Manhattan. Consistent with the vision for a Lower Manhattan rail link, Imagine the 2nd Avenue subway running south to Lower Manhattan, then going under the East River to downtown Brooklyn and on to Jamaica, Queens via the Long Island Railroad Atlantic Avenue branch with a connection to the air train to JFK. 2nd Avenue, that was right. 2nd Avenue can also provide a Manhattan route for a new service in Queens, running through the 63rd Street Tunnel, relieving overcrowding on the Queens Boulevard line. After completion of East Side Access and 2nd Avenue, the wave of investments that need to be made in the next 25 to 40 years should rely heavily on the MTA's diamonds in the rough. Underutilized or dormant freight and commuter rail rights-of-way that can be transformed into subway lines and lightly used middle tracks on subway lines that can be used for new express services. The MTA has several interesting options for boosting service and relieving overcrowding in the Queens Boulevard corridor. Each of these options take advantage of underutilized rights-of-way that reach into eastern and southeastern Queens. In one scenario, the extension of the 2nd Avenue subway I described could connect to new tracks within the right-of-way of the Long Island Railroad main line between Jamaica and the Port Washington Junction. We can also utilize the Rockaway Beach right-of-way to provide new transit access from the main line corridor to southern Queens and the Rockaway Peninsula. We need to take a close look at the Regional Plan Association's circumferential subway line, which would convert the lightly used Bay Ridge freight line into a subway service that would run in an arc from southern Brooklyn to Queens to the Bronx. In the Bronx, we have at least 2 opportunities to give customers faster, more direct connections, something planners call right routing. We can extend the D train north and east to connect to the number 2 and 5 trains at Gun Hill Road for more direct connections between Central Bronx and Manhattan's West Side. Since this is in the vicinity of Metro North's Williamsburg Station, there may well be an opportunity for a new commuter rail subway transfer, much like the connection between the number 7 subway line and the Long Island Railroad at Woodside. The MTA's network's 55 miles of underused middle track on elevated subway lines also represent a tremendous opportunity that we must exploit. These lines, primarily in Brooklyn and the Bronx, might enable additional express services to be operated, shortening travel times between these boroughs and the Manhattan core. In Staten Island, we can provide congestion relief by implementing rapid transit options for the North Shore and the West Shore. With appropriate levels of ridership, these communities are excellent candidates for BRT and light rail. On Long Island, the success of our East End shuttle service has shown that there is a great deal of interest in shorter shuttle trains that run more frequently. These so-called scoots would provide suburb-to-suburb service on the North Fork, South Fork, and Oyster Bay branch. To the north, the Tappan Zee Bridge project provides a great opportunity for us to bring Metro North trains from the west of Hudson counties of Orange and Rockland across the river to connect with the Hudson line. This would provide direct travel from those counties to the east side of Manhattan and also provide access to jobs in Orange and Rockland for New York City and Westchester residents. Similarly, transit over the Tappan Zee and the I-287 corridor will allow direct access from the rapidly growing west of Hudson region to the business centers in White Plains, Stamford, and Greenwich. In partnership with the Port Authority, we must also explore developing a second air train service to LaGuardia Airport by building a new link from the Long Island Railroad main line at Woodside along and above existing rail and highway rights-of-way. We will be using a share of the 2008 to 2013 capital funds to analyze these exciting network expansion options. With your help, the MTA will select the options that will meet our needs over the next 25 to 40 years. The projects and vision I've just described for the next 5 years and beyond will meet our needs in the 21st century. Executing these projects will start with our $29.5 billion capital program and congestion pricing revenue. We recognize that $29.5 billion is a lot of money, but we have, and I'm sure you would agree, no choice. I congratulate the MTA Board for voting unanimously to submit this bold plan to Albany. I want to thank the Governor and the Mayor for this strong support of the capital plan. During the fair and toll hearings last year, members of the Assembly and the State Senate repeatedly cited the importance of rapid transit and underscored the need for Albany to invest in the system in a substantial way. I look forward to working with them as we present our case for the capital plan. Even after Albany and City Hall resume making significant contributions to the MTA capital program, it still won't be enough. We must join other national transit providers to persuade Washington to pitch in and provide a much higher level of federal support. The next transportation reauthorization in 2009 will be extremely important. Historically, the federal government has provided 90% of the funds to build highways. The level of federal support for rapid transit and regional rail is inadequate. In an age of climate change, these priorities need to change. If the last 40 years have taught us anything, it's this simple truth. The region's economic vitality, livability, and beauty are inextricably linked to the fortunes of the MTA. If we shirk our responsibility to the MTA network, we put our region at risk. Even as we enter difficult economic times, we must continue to invest. Remember, our region built the Empire State Building and the I&D subway system in the depths of the Great Depression. Today, we stand at a crossroads. We can take a business-as-usual approach as to how we run the MTA, completing the projects that are currently underway and continuing the State of Good Repair program. Or we can set our sights higher. We can complete the projects underway, continue the State of Good Repair program, and press on to give the region the network of mobility it needs to be competitive with its global peers. That is the road, or should I say track, we must take. As the MTA goes, so goes the region. The MTA that I know and love moves 8.5 million people a day. The MTA that I know and love revolutionized travel in this region by creating the Metro card. The MTA that I know and love rebuilt the number 1 and number 9 subway lines at the World Trade Center site, ahead of schedule and under budget. That MTA, your MTA, our MTA. I know we are ready for a new set of challenges. All 68,000 of us are ready to rise to the occasion. Thank you. of our board to go answer some questions from our students from the high school and colleges.
You get me here and I don't get to talk.
Okay, so shall we have the students line up?
I do want to say something. I was joking earlier in the day that there are a lot of gray hairs on the MTA board, and that is very true. So I think it's especially fitting that here on our 40th anniversary, we have young people in the audience. Because what we're trying to do with this system is not something that many of us on the board will ever see finished. But what we do need is young people to see the same vision and to work towards those ends. I also have a confession to make to you. I had not seen this video before today. And I am ashamed to admit, gosh, how far we've come. I first started riding the subway in early 70s sometime. And it wasn't just intimidating, it was scary. It's very important that we maintain the core program and hold on to the improvements we've got, as well as to the expansion. I'm renewed in that belief, and I think my fellow board members feel the same way. So who has a question?
What is the timeline for the various projects, and how will the MTA minimize service disruption during construction?
The timeline for the projects vary. For East Side Access and 2nd Avenue, those are now slated for 2015. We also have these new set of projects I described that we're about to begin the planning for, and that will require funding in the future. So it varies. There's a lot of stuff in the next 5-year capital plan and that $29.5 billion I described, but we're also trying to do is lay out these potential projects in the future. And in regard to what we'll be doing to mitigate the impact on our system, because it is so much work, I'd like to introduce Howard Roberts to respond briefly in terms of what we do to mitigate the impact.
Well, that's an extremely good question, because right now we have more demands on the system for construction and repair than we've ever had in our history. And that means we have nights and weekends, more service that we have to reroute and shut down than we ever had before. I'm absolutely astounded, as a matter of fact, with that level of disruption on the weekends. Our weekend service has reached a new high in terms of ridership. We simply just have to manage better. We have to, every time we take a track out of service, we've got to get as many people that have things to do on that stretch of track out there. And that's really what it comes down to.
Let me add, I'm particularly proud Councilman Luke couldn't be here. He called before he was going to be here. But I just want to thank Mr. Howard Roberts for the work he did on the Flushing signal work, which is part of the capital program, where by using the Long Island Railroad, we were able to soften the impact from that work. So that's just one example. And Councilman Lou, I appreciate the public support they expressed for the work that Howard Roberts did in mitigating the impact of that capital program effort. Next.
Hello, my name is Sam Vargas. I'm from Urban Assembly School of Design and Construction. My question is, what kind of new technology will the new station have?
Okay. Stations? with new technology.
Subway riders here.
This is premature, but as a matter of fact, at Chairman Hemmedeger's suggestion, we're about to launch a design competition for the station of the future and look at how we can incorporate new approaches, new technology into our station configuration.
Understand that we're having a new extension. I don't know how that will be funded. Will passengers or road riders will be increasing pay.
So which extension is 7?
Yeah, 7 line and
Well, the most immediate extension of existing subway lines is the number 7 line. That is a partnership with the city. Appreciate the leadership of the city in developing a variation of what we call taxing and finance pilot funds tied to the development of the real estate that will occur as we extend the number 7 line.
To expand on your question a little bit, part of the reason that Lee has presented today is to break out more detail about the capital budget that we have proposed or may propose. The board actually is still evaluating it ourselves, but that budget does provide for some suggested funding mechanisms. We still are dependent upon state and local aid in order to expand some of these issues, and a great deal of federal funding as well.
And beyond extensions, as everyone knows, as I said in the speech, we have the 2nd Avenue subway, which is a new subway, and for that, revenue sources I described in the speech. We need the help from Albany, from City Hall, and also from Washington.
Thank you for yourself from Branson College. I'm an instructor at Branson College teaching electronics. And I'm just wondering what kind of subjects should we emphasize in our course outline in order to get our students prepared for MTA opportunities?
Well, it's hard to specifically talk about the curricula because it varies from an engineering perspective, from a planning perspective. But one of the things that we are doing at the MTA is working very closely with our academic community. One of the things that we set up a year ago was a regional transit advisory group where we have academic professionals, professors at the City College, Les Paswell is here, John Falcoke and others, so we can tie together and provide that feedback. So we're doing that, but it really varies depending upon what discipline, whether it's an engineering discipline, a planning discipline, and so forth.
But nearly any one of the disciplines profits from the kind of science and technology that this institution represents. So I'm not belittling my own background, which is liberal arts, but the technology element is key to all of them.
I wanted to know how the contract with subway card system works and how would it affect New Yorkers without credit cards and students.
Well, we're in the process of developing it. We've had a pilot that we have done with Citibank, and I don't want to get into the details technically about how the technology works. But essentially, as we have been using it on the Lexington Avenue line, you have the device and it allows you to proceed not having to swipe. So there are different variations about how this is doing, how this is done. There's a variation where we would act as the banker. There's a variation where we work in concert with other banks. Different variations have been tried by London, other places overseas, and so we're in the process of determining how we in New York want to approach it. But the point is, we are really pleased with the pilot that we had with this, and we are looking forward to this next generation.
My name is Henry from Blackjack University, and my point is that the MTA provides great public transportation service. However, it's traditionally been underfunded. Are there any alternatives or innovative ways for raising capital that the MTA is considering, such as partnering up with non-transit entities, such as taking in selling naming rights, adopting stations, etc.?
that was a setup for us. I'll let Lydia answer. There are many things on the horizon.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion about public-private partnership, and I think one of the things, and I'm asked that occasionally by our board, what we're trying to do is take advantage of that in the transit arena. Generally, what we call PPPs are more relevant to airport terminal development and toll roads, but there are areas where we can do it. First, we want to give the MTA great credit for what it's done over the last 10 years. We've actually significantly increased revenue from advertising, from adopting cars. Some of you may have taken the Times Square shuttle. You see lots of advertising where we take entire subway cars, working with a private vendor. The Beacon Beacon project that I just described earlier is a public-private partnership. So we're also going to look at Second Avenue, whether there are opportunities with the real estate to optimize it. I don't think that anyone should be under the illusion that we can fund all of the capital program this way, but at the same time, we are going to be as entrepreneurial, as aggressive as we can, while protecting public interest.
You know, Grand Central Terminal is a good example of a property of the MTA that's become an icon and is now a shopping magnet. You know, I love to go shopping in Grand Central Terminal. There are also other initiatives going on. For example, RPA is looking at a station in Orange County, Carolyn Station, to see whether that might be applicable for TOD. And we just have to keep planning that far ahead in order to get the funding base that's needed. In the short term, it's not going to be the answer to everything.
Good morning, and my question is, how will the expansion of the Second Avenue and the east side affect the current flow of traffic, pedestrian travel, and business?
We're working very hard to mitigate it. You know, it certainly is not easy to drop a subway line in the borough of Manhattan without having impacts, but we're working closely with Commissioner Sadi Khan. Actually, a couple of weeks ago was describing to me how she was working through various issues along the Second Avenue subway corridor. The East Side Access Project is a little bit easier in terms of its alignment, in terms of not impacting traffic, but we have just some extraordinary professionals here. Ryan Aiken, who is the acting president of the MTA Capital Construction, and her staff. And so working closely with her and New York City DOT, we are trying to mitigate that as much as possible, and we are working strenuously with the local elected officials who represent that area to mitigate the impact. Can't say it will be painless, but I would suspect a lot less of an impact than it was when we built the rest of the subway network in the last century.
Thank you.
Hi, I believe that to relate to the public and to attract tourists as well as business, the Great Subway should reflect the diversity in culture, ethnicity, and race unique only to New York City through artworks and sculptures. I'm not talking about graffiti, but is there any elaborate program that MTA has to promote accessibility throughout its entire network?
Senator, are you here? Okay. Why don't you come down? We have a program called Arts in Transit, and it's exciting. It's a substantial amount of money. We've been criticized for it in some instances for that, but part of the money comes to us because federal projects require arts in transit, and part of it is just trying to renovate some of the really wonderful stations that we already have that are full of art. There is a program.
This is Sandra Butterworth for Arts for Transit for the MTA.
What a great question. I am so proud to say, absolutely, I am so proud to say that art has been and will be a part of all our rebuilding projects. And I'm also very proud to say that it has been and will be a very diverse mosaic, if you will, in every way. In ethnicity, in gender, in level of
professionalism as far as experience. We are diverse across the board, and our goal has always been and will be to reflect our ridership.
And also, to offer an apology, I did not introduce my former chair, the chairman of the Tax and Fee Commission, Matt Dallas, who I served with as a commissioner for and also Inspector General, Barry Kluger. Where's Barry? I saw him earlier.
Just to add something, it's not only the transit authority that has an arts program. Metro North has had some substantial art installations as well. So this is something that goes through the MTA community.
What are the new plans for security? What are the new plans for security?
Well, I talked a little bit about this in the speech. Is our plans for security, and I can't really talk a lot about this because this is a public venue, and sadly there are people outside the world who have targeted transit facilities. But it's basically comprised of two components. One is the physical, where we try and harden our facilities and have protection equipment and other things that we can do physically with the environment. And then the other, working closely with Commissioner Ray Kelly from NYPD and our own MTA Police Department, which has a lead for commuter rail operations, particularly in the outer counties outside of our boroughs. What we are doing is try to significantly improve and have the most energetic deployment strategies to keep people who want to us balanced. And I also think it's a good time to again acknowledge our See Something, Say Something program, which has also been helpful. We also have to get the message out that the public is also very important in terms of being our eyes and ears. And lastly, very pleased in the last year, we couldn't squeeze everything into this speech as long as it was, but we've done some really fine work with our partners in labor, training our employees, our non-security employees, so they are part of the team as well.
Hi, my name is Art Chang. My question is, are there plans to improve ventilation?
In terms of the ventilation system, obviously it was designed in some cases 100 years ago, mostly dependent on vents. We do have a program to spread vent plants across the system, and that is going to take us quite a few years to do. In terms of air conditioning in the stations, that's something I would like to see, but I think that's a long way in the future.
Although we do have air tempering in for 2nd Avenue subway, which would do that. Okay, students.
I'm a graduate student. I'm a graduate student at Pratt, and I want to first thank you for the opportunity to take questions and commend you for the work on BRT. It's really exciting, and for the presentation, it's even more exciting. But I have one question.
You know that folks at Pratt expressed some interest.
Yeah. One question about some of the proposed lines. Really extensive and wonderful, but I'm curious to know what the possibility of stretching them over some of the bridges are. For example, the Ocean Avenue line goes all the way up to the Williamsburg Bridge, and then people have to get on the J&Z, which is a great first step, but are there plans in the long term to have some of the lines go over the Eastern bridges so as to seamlessly have them kind of tie right in, and also prevent what was one of the original plans was to alleviate problems of congestion on the trains anyway. So I'm just curious to know kind of that long-term thinking is possible.
In the initial 5 corridors that we are doing together with Commissioner Sadiq Khan, none of those go over bridges, but certainly would not rule it out. What we want to do, in fact, a large part of today is to set our horizons a little higher than what's right in front of us, because years pass very quickly. We want to be positioned, and we don't want to be behind the curve. So I can't say to you that any of the bus routes that we've talked about, I think initially there was a set of 25 to 100 candidates that was then winnowed down to the last 5. But it's certainly something that we would look at and certainly open to do. Also, very pleased with the work that we are doing with City DOT in terms of traffic signal. Last question. And just first, before I say that, well, actually, why don't you do that, and then I just want to introduce just a couple minutes.
Hi, my name is Mike Friedman. I'm a graduate student at Wagner, at Henry's Wagner School of Urban Planning. I haven't had a chance to take your class, but I hope you'll be teaching it next year.
We try.
So I was really interested in a lot of the system expansion future plans you were talking about, and I think that in the past we've been able to do, particularly in the beginning of the 20th century, subways really helped build Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn by laying the foundation for development out there. And a lot of people think that suburban sprawl has been caused by not coordinating land use and transportation policy. I just want to give 2 examples where I think the MTA needs to get some. It's a question. I want the MTA to I want the MTA to participate in coordinating its transportation investments with land use planning. And 2 quick examples I would give you is in the G train, development along that line has gotten ahead of the service schedule for it, so you can't really get on a northbound, on a Queens-bound train during rush hour. And also there have been downzonings in areas of Queens and the Bronx where you were talking about doing transit investment. So in order to fully maximize the benefit of these transit investments, I think that land use needs to be coordinated with that. I wondered how the MTA was going to participate in that.
Mike, I very much appreciate that question, and one of the major points that I tried to make in the speech, I think ethics and I think is breaking down boundaries, and clearly the issue of land use, whether it's in New York City, it's in planning department, the city planning commission, or outside counties. One of the reasons why we want to break down the boundaries is to work more closely and align them. With the program you saw here, one of the things that former Deputy Mayor Dan Dockwell and I agreed to was to try and take the Plan 2030 data, taking the mayor's plan, to have it coordinate with what we saw in front of us. So I think that with our work on congestion pricing, also some work that proceeded to meet at the MTA, that the city and the MTA, I would argue, are working more closely together than they ever have. That's essential in terms of land use planning there. You heard what we said about transit-oriented development. That's within that frame. And then in terms of the counties, the other counties within our service district, I've met with virtually every, except there's I think only one county, to be honest, but all the other county executives to ensure that we have a clear dialogue with the counties. In some cases, I think land use goes to the town level, not the county, working with County Executive Swansea in terms of his vision for the Nassau Hub. So a lot of work to be done. That is the key issue in terms of the integration of transit and land use, and that's what we're going to be trying to do. And I think relates to what we talked about. Didn't get a chance to introduce the rest of the transit family here. Didn't have any questions for them, but just want to briefly introduce Pete Canito, Alina Williams, Dave Moretti, Tom Savage, Neil Gallo, and our Chief Operating Officer, Susan Duffin.
I say that it was a pleasure for me to see the level of education about transit that you all brought to these questions